Well, the story I want to share with you tonight is about the political equator. And it begins in the two border neighborhoods where they have been the site of investigation for my architecture practice at the most trafficked border in the world, the San Diego-Tijuana border. Both neighborhoods adjacent to this checkpoint. To the north, San Isidro, which is in fact the first immigrant neighborhood after you cross the checkpoint from Tijuana into California, where I've been working with Casa Familiar, a nonprofit, a community-based nonprofit organization. With me, we have been collaborating in investigating the positive impact of immigration, of immigrants, in the transformation of the American neighborhood, and how the socioeconomic informalities as immigrants transform space in their own neighborhoods, negotiating resources, boundaries, and space, can begin to inspire us to reimagine and reorganize existing urban policy. To the south, I've been collaborating with another nonprofit, a community-based organization in a very different environment. It's in fact Laureles Canyon, the last slum of Latin America, literally crashing against the border. And in this environment, I've been investigating with Alter Terra the amazing recycling dynamics, as in fact the slums of Tijuana recycle the waste of Southern California into new opportunities. And it is this second-hand urbanization and these informal settlements in Tijuana where we can also begin to reimagine the meaning of infrastructure in the city, the meaning of environmental justice in the city. So these two small neighborhoods become the laboratory to reimagine, in fact, the communities, neighborhoods as political units, environments where we can reimagine governance at a very local scale. And why not to say that out of the specificity of these political and socioeconomic conditions, we can begin to reimagine the border region at large. A sort of neighborhood-based urbanization that not only reimagines border regions as incredible laboratories to rethink citizenship, but why not to say, out of the specificity of these small neighborhoods at the border, we can begin to reimagine global governance. So at some point I drew a line extending from these two small neighborhoods flanking this checkpoint and realized that in fact this checkpoint is connected to at least two other most intensive checkpoints in the world, the Ceuta and Melilla border, which is the main funnel of immigration from North Africa into Europe, and also picking up the Israeli-Palestinian border, creating a global corridor of geographies of conflict organized in a necklace of checkpoints between the 30 to 35th degrees north parallel. I call this the political equator. And it's in fact that this political equator is not necessarily a flat line dividing the world black and white in a sense, but for me it was a point of entry to begin investigating other geographies of conflict across the world, where I began to engage other artistic practices, other governments in understanding how in these geographies of conflict they were reorganizing institutional protocols from New York City to Philadelphia, and particularly to Colombia, where in the city of Bogota, in Medellin, we began to find amazingly progressive urban policies led by municipal visions, such as the one of Antanas Mokus. As many of you might remember, this legendary mayor, philosopher turned mayor, who really sent a message that out of this, in this environment, Bogota, you can remember that Bogota and Medellin in the mid-90s were really characterized as the most dangerous cities in the world because of the drug violence. In fact, today they have become an incredible epicenter of urban transformation. Antanas Mokus being one of those incredible municipal visions reminded us that, in fact, before we transform the city physically, we first have to transform social behavior, and that, in fact, life in the city and everywhere else is sacred, that the respect for human life, for every human life, is fundamental to the core of democracy, and why not to say it, to the formation of a new citizenship culture. In fact, Antanas Mokus also reminded us, as many other leaders in this country, including Sergio Fajardo in Medellin, that urban conflict, in fact, cannot be resolved with police repression, but in fact out of community processes. I think this is something that today in this country we would must learn from. My colleague and partner, Fona Foreman, a political theorist, and myself went to seek out Antanas Mokus to begin proposing a project. In fact, is there a cross-border citizen? Could we bring the notion of this visionary mayor about increasing the engagement of participation in the city to a border region? Could it be that, in fact, in border regions is where we could reimagine the very conception of citizenship? So we went back to our two neighborhoods that flank this border and our collaborations with these nonprofit organizations, and we began to go deeper into the territory. In fact, at this very place where that informal settlement that I spoke about in the beginning, Laureles Canyon, an 85,000 people slum, crashing literally against the border wall, and the canyon where this slum is located, crossing tenuously across this formidable barrier into a Tijuana River estuary on the US side. So this is where we find this tsunami of the Laureles Canyon, this shantytown of 85,000 people, crashing literally against the wall, and in the distance you see the Tijuana River estuary on the US side, and finally where this watershed system that is fragmented by the border wall finally sinks into the Pacific Ocean. After 9/11, Homeland Security claimed 200 feet of jurisdiction parallel to the border wall. And it is here where they began to build the third border wall, exactly adjacent to this shantytown, interrupting the natural hydrology of the land in the shape of this, again, watershed system where many of these shantytowns are placed. And here's how on the other side we find the estuary. So it is this collision of ecologies, the environmental zone and this shantytown crashing against each other, overlaid by militarization that has been the epicenter of this project. The shantytown, which is higher, in fact, in relationship to the estuary, after the construction of the third wall, the pollution and actual trash from the contamination from the shantytown began to infiltrate itself into the estuary, contaminating it. So here's where the project with Antanas Mokus began to elevate into a provocation to the two municipalities of these two border cities. Can, in fact, these two border cities collaborate in resolving many of these shared issues? Can they, in fact, be the architects to construct new strategies of coexistence? That was the question that really was posed, and a project began by provoking Homeland Security and these two municipalities to consider the shared interests between these two divided cities. So 2 years ago, we processed a special permit with Homeland Security to, in fact, insert ourselves into that jurisdictional sector of power, an area that is inaccessible to the public. But we processed a special permit that enabled us to do two things, two gestures. One, to insert into that jurisdictional zone that is forbidden, a forum. In fact, to bring into this site of conflict the conversation across institutions. So we inserted a tent right next to the border wall, right next to the dam that Homeland Security built in the last years, interrupting the natural flow of water and hiding behind it 85,000 people living in that slum. And inside that tent, we invited stakeholders from many of the other institutions that were involved in that site of conflict, including Homeland Security, Mexican immigration, activists from the slum, and actors and politicians from the municipalities, scholars and artists to come and discuss the issues of concern between these two environments, utilizing models and visualizations that could really visualize in more tactical, more strategic ways, the issues that really were undermining the fluidity of these environmental and socioeconomic dynamics within these two cities. Can we as artists, in fact, intervene today in the debate? Can art become a tool to reorganize the conversation across institutions? The second gesture was a public action. We, in fact, convinced Homeland Security to let the whole audience, 300 plus people, including many of those institutions that I spoke about, to cross a drain that had been recently built by Homeland Security from the estuary on the US side right into the slum on the Tijuana side, something that hadn't been done at all in the past. And it is this possibility to walk through these geographies of conflict, where walking in fact becomes a political act, because it's different to really have a discussion in an auditorium in a university, but actually transplanting ourselves to the very specificity of these geographies of conflict to experientially witness the dramatic images that really are embedded in these environments. So we convinced Homeland Security to let us transform, here's where we are arriving to the new wall, to transform the drain into an official port of entry from San Diego into Tijuana. Here is where we are crossing this most contested border, and on the other side, Mexican immigration is waiting for us to stamp our passports. So here, where people are actually being checked into the country, because it was an official port of entry for 24 hours, people witnessed the sewer moving from the slum into the estuary, contaminating it. It was only then where many of these politicians, environmental activists, and so on, begin to really realize the issues that are at stake in the relationship of these two environments that collide so drastically, so dramatically. So here is, for me, an incredible lesson as an architect. Can art, in fact, become a performative tool to access complexity? Can really we infiltrate ourselves into peripheral zones and spaces to elevate public space, less as a space of beautification and more as a space of contestation and negotiation across institutions, to in fact enable new types of debates across divided agencies and institutions, but only out of the pressing issues of concern. And it is here where the idea of new social agreements begin to emerge that are fundamental today, in fact, to reimagine citizenship altogether. At this very moment when we were crossing this forbidden space between these two radically different environments, and as Mexican immigration was stamping our passports in the context of these fragmented environmental areas, I began to reimagine or to think that we need urgently today to reimagine citizenship beyond the nation state, beyond the kinds of impositions of jurisdictional boundaries that have divided us across communities and across territories. Can we, in fact, reimagine citizenship out of our shared values, the shared interests by these two, again, divided cities? I think this is fundamental today to imagine of other conceptions of citizenship, mainly at a time, I think, when much of the discussion in our country particularly has begun to suggest that an anti-immigration, an anti-government, and an anti-public infrastructure society only commits a civic suicide. And I think emerging from these reflections, we began to realize, obviously, that one of the most fundamental challenges today in New York or San Diego or Tijuana or any other city in the world is how do we recalibrate after the violence of neoliberal economic and political policies exerted around natural and socio-economic resources. Can we begin to recalibrate the relationship between individuals, collectives, and institutions? I think this must be essential, whether we rethink the meaning of immigration in New York or in other places in the United States, will be an essential framework to begin moving, slightly moving, from a private to a public imagination. Thank you very much.
This is the end of this evening, and probably you have been thinking, isn't Van Alen Institute a design organization, and why are they doing this tonight? Well, actually, I should explain that. Yes, we are a design organization, and we do big design competitions, and we do research. But for us, it's also very important to understand what we're making designs for, and why we're helping to create these designs. And evenings like this are for us a way to explore what is happening out in society, what is happening in culture. So these are actually very important evenings to help us in our thinking. And of course, we prefer doing this in a shared setting with all of you. So thank you for coming tonight. We continue the evening with a small party at our new space. It's only a few blocks up on 22nd Street, between 5th and 6th. So the address is 30 West 22nd Street. And join us for a drink there, and I hope you will have a very good weekend. And you can possibly join us for some of the other programs that we run this weekend. Many of them on commuting, ranging from subway games to tours to High Bridge, and a series of discussions on both days. So thank you very much and have a good weekend.